All right. Well, for that matter, this limitation also applies to information about parts of the world where we have not lived, to people we do not know in our own part of the world, and even to most events we have heard about in the lives of people we do know.
Right. The issue here is it's going to be tough if you apply this criteria because now we're going to start ruling out all kinds of things, right? Information about parts of the world that we have yet lived in. Well, we can't accept that. It's a perspective, right? Or information about people that we don't know in other parts of the world. Well, we haven't experienced that. We haven't checked that out. So we can't really. And where does that leave us, right? Eventually, we're stuck in our own little world, and that's where he's going to come to here.
Right. And I always mention this too, is you have to make sure your terminology is consistent with what you think you're experiencing. Because sometimes, like when we read the early church fathers, we apply anachronistically terms to what they're saying, or misread when they talk about the real presence of Christ being in the Eucharist. The Catholics and the Protestants all get hullabaloo about, wanting to shake their fist and put the quote in people's face. And then you realize, for people pre-Enlightenment, the spiritual was the real presence. And so we have to make sure that we're not reading back into things or reading things separate from us. So, I'm big into trying to replicate Greek classical education systems and just trying to find how setting up a classroom in Plato's time would operate and how it would work and what that would look like. And sometimes I have to pull up schematics of what reconstructions of Plato's classroom would look like in order to make sure I'm understanding what I'm reading from a perspective of what a classroom might be, and realize that when I have a view of what classroom is versus what Plato might have had, they're going to be two distinct things. So we need to keep that in mind when we're taking in information from people that's not us, not during our time, and may be utilizing terminology that we've either taken for granted or, homophones, similar sounding words, but different meanings.
Right.
Well, indeed, we do not expect every individual scientist to repeat every prior experiment because he or she does not trust earlier scientists' records. Although, if you have that perspective that, there's no amount of evidence that you can be shown for those crazy claims like germ theory, well, then maybe you have to do all the same ones as well. But granted, all our sources are usually slanted by observers and reporters' perspectives. Yet we cannot avoid depending on information in these sources if we hope to say anything beyond our own very limited experience. Again, Hannibal crossing the Alps with elephants. It's a grandiose claim. It can't be helped. But yet we have the evidence to show that it happened. But it's a grandiose claim. It's not possible. You couldn't take an elephant today and go across the Alps. So we just know it's not possible. Well, except it seems kind of like at least one guy did it a couple times. So and went back too. And so what do we do with that if we're solely focused on us being the sole source of dependable information? Well, it doesn't seem like
so everything is from a perspective, and so we can't trust anything unless we experience ourselves or for scientists repeat the experiment, that sort of thing.
Right.
And we're left. He actually, what he tells us is, despite Western culture's individualism, which is what this boils down to, right? It's just about whatever I experience. Making direct experience of events a requisite for knowledge about them, as Hume, he says, seems to require for miracles, would postulate an autonomy more severe, he tells us, than any normal person would sanction and practice.
Exactly.
So it just goes too far. Right. Some things you have to say, okay, yep, that is from their perspective, but it seems like that did happen. And so we can have knowledge about that.
Right.